Hello, welcome to the Middle School Bookmarker Show. My name is Joellen.
And I'm Chris. We are teachers reading the middle school novel Seedfolks by Paul Fleischman.
And today we're covering chapters 3 and 4, Wendell and Gonzalo. If you haven't read those chapters yet, go do that now and then come back and listen to our conversation about them.
Oh, and by the way, we're going to get this whole show wrapped up in just 11 minutes because 11 minutes is all you need to
transform from an old man to a baby back to an old man.
And while that's a funny comment, we do start off with a big bummer on the Wendell chapter. Mm-hmm. We meet Wendell when he shares that he has a very negative emotional reaction to hearing his phone ring in his house. He says, "I can't hear a phone and not jerk inside." And we find out that is because his son was murdered and he got a phone call about that. And I guess his wife died in a car wreck in one of the past couple years. And both those events, those terrible events, he had to answer a phone call from it. And now every time the phone rings, he thinks about that. Terrible.
Yeah, every time. This time, though, Anna is calling him. And Wendell mentions that he takes care and kind of looks out for this old lady. So even though when we meet him, he's got this negative vibe, rightly so, we do get some hints about what type of person he is by the way he takes care of her.
He seems like a pretty good guy despite the hardships in his life. Yeah,
absolutely.
So Anna begs him to come on up, and he goes up, and she's immediately screaming about some dying plants, and she throws those binoculars to him that she bought at the end of the last chapter. Cool connection there.
Yeah, absolutely. And because Wendell has some farming knowledge, he grew up in Kentucky. And he says, "Whoa, those plants shouldn't be planted yet. It's way too early."
And Anna goes on and just insists that we have to help these plants because Kim hasn't been seen in days. So Anna's been at that window watching for Kim to take care of these plants every hour, every waking hour. And she hasn't noticed Kim be there for days now.
Right. And I think she's a little bit worried. So Wendell, looks through the binoculars and he sees that the beans have survived down in the lot because this old janky garbage fridge, the one, remember, that Anna was working around, reflected sunlight to keep those seeds warm. So thank you, Yankee Skanky Garbage Fridge.
Thank you, Garbage Fridge. So Wendell heads down there and he's about to water the beans when all of a sudden Kim shows up and she looks afraid. And we have a very tense moment for just a moment. They do not speak a word to each other, but they gesture to each other with the watering cans. And eventually Wendell goes and he waters it. And then he leaves without saying a word. And my reader's spider sense, as we're going off here, because of that line and because of that situation, leaving without saying a word, I'm thinking about all these different characters. They have various backgrounds. They speak different languages. They're often from different cultures. And being able to speak is a big part of communicating with people. But if you have this diverse group, and we got some from Vietnam, some from Romania, some from all these different places we're probably going to read about, then being able to say words to each other is going to be difficult. But it does seem like they found some common ground around these lima beans. I wonder if this is foreshadowing about what's going to happen next.
Absolutely. I love that. So later that evening, Wendell returns to the garden and he sees that Kim has replicated what he had done to the other seeds and his farming technique. So what he had done was he took a ring, he kind of, with his fingers, he gathered some of the dirt and made sort of a ring around each of the young seedlings. And I like to think of that when I'm planting a garden or tending a plant, that ring are kind of like two hands together. And if your fingers are coming up and forming almost a cradle for that seedling. So when it rains or when you water them, the ring holds the water near the roots. It doesn't just run off. So, it's a really purposeful thing for gardeners to have water stay in a plant so it can use the water if it doesn't rain for a while or you don't water it. But it's also kind of symbolic to me that those two hands holding that tender seedling.
Man, you are an expert gardener.
Oh,
absolutely.
Well, I don't know about that,
but. So Wendell returns and all of a sudden he has a Bible quote come to mind about how a child shall lead them. And Wendell thinks about all the things that have happened to him in his life that are pretty negative. He's not in the best economic situation. He's had those horrible problems with his family or deaths in his family. He realizes that there's lots of things he cannot change, but he can focus on things he can change, like this dirty, trash-filled lot.
Absolutely. His attitude does switch because he, in fact, brings a shovel home from work that night and he picks another spot in the lot. And we know what he's going to do, right? We got a garden going. That's a good thing.
Seems like these folks are turning into seed folks. And the next seed folks that we meet are Gonzalo and his uncle, Tio Juan. Tio Juan. I almost said Uncle Tio. I'll probably do that about 15 more times. And I want to admit something here. So the beginning of this chapter, it starts off with a pretty confusing line. The older you are, the younger you get when you move to the U.S. I reread this line about 10 times and I had no idea what the author was talking about. And I just decided, you know what, maybe the context maybe it'll make more sense when I get more information and more context about the situation. So I tried rereading and it didn't make sense, but I continued to read. And by the end of the chapter, it did.
It does. Right. And I agree with you. It's kind of like, wait a minute, where are we going with that? But as we read, we learn about Gonzalo, and he's school-age, middle-aged Guatemalan immigrant. Again, another beautiful cultural diversity coming in. He's taken algebra, so he's probably, 8th grade, maybe even 9th grade in school. And don't believe what people say, because even though Gonzalo is from Guatemala, he speaks English. And you want to tell him how he learned to speak that English, Chris?
It seems like he just sat around watching cartoons all day and he absorbed the English, which I think is a common thing that happens for people that are fresh off the boat in America. Watching TV really helps learn language.
Absolutely. And that's the everyday language that we learn, not just the book language. So he probably purposely did it as well, right? He's a smart kid. So he's fluent in English. However, his dad, who it has to work all day. He doesn't have the luxury of watching cartoons or reading comics. He was not. So he's relying on Gonzalo, his young son, to translate because his father doesn't want to make mistakes. When he's buying things, he's talking to the landlady. He wants to, appear knowledgeable and not make mistakes. So Gonzalo helps him.
And this is where we start to understand what Gonzalo meant when he said that the older you are, the younger you get in the U.S. because his dad, and when we later find out his uncle, they were very capable in their home countries, but because they came to America and they didn't speak the language, there was this huge barrier for them. And it was as if they had to go around like children, gesturing and mumbling. Some things make sense, some things don't. And that's what Gonzalo meant. That they went from being capable adults who could interact to all of a sudden being very restricted only because they don't know the language.
Absolutely. And if you've ever been in a foreign country where you don't know the language, you can really understand that, right? And we meet Tio Juan or Uncle Juan shortly after. And he also started this process of becoming younger when he came to live with them. He was one of the oldest people in his former village, in his pueblo, and probably one of the most accomplished and knowledgeable. But now he can't even speak English and he doesn't understand the TV.
And unfortunately, we find out that he doesn't even speak Spanish. He speaks kind of like an obscure native Indian language. So there's even fewer resources for him. I feel very sad for him because he must be very lonely and isolated to not have anybody to talk to all day.
Absolutely. And what do you do with your time? He wanders around the apartment muttering to himself like a small child would. Sometimes he wanders out of the apartment, into the street, which really upsets Gonzalo's mom because where's he going to go? Where's he going to wind up? So now Gonzalo is babysitting this old man too.
Babysitting an old man.
Yeah.
So one of these days when he is babysitting, Gonzalo is probably watching cartoons or something, and Uncle Tio sneaks out again. And Gonzalo has to really worry about him because he doesn't speak the language. There's also some violence in the community that he's worried about. So Gonzalo is frantically searching for him throughout the neighborhood, and he does eventually find him.
He does find him. And here we go. He finds him in that garbage-filled lot. But Tio is not alone. He's not wandering around looking aimlessly, but he is with Wendell. and they have made a lot of, Wendell and Tio probably now too, have made a lot of progress on the part of the garden. So Tio is trying to communicate with Wendell without language, and what he's trying to communicate with, I think I know. Go ahead.
We got about a minute left, so we got to rush through these last guys. So Wendell tries to understand, and it doesn't work the first time, unfortunately. But then they go home, and Tio Juan communicates with Gonzalo's mom, who can understand Tio Juan. And the two, Tio Juan and Gonzalo, return to the lot the next day with some gardening equipment. Yeah. Gonzalo recognizes Wendell from school also as a janitor. We forgot to make that point earlier. I wanted to note that because all these characters are super interconnected.
That's right.
So Tio Juan goes out there and he starts doing some weird stuff, Joellen.
Yeah, he does. And it gives us a good indication. He studies the land. He studies the angle of the sun. He even smells and eats some of the dirt, probably trying to figure out what's in it. And they get to digging up a new part of the garden. Gonzalo is like, oh, what's going on? I'm so embarrassed. But Tio Juan is thrilled.
And it's like he's becoming a young person again, which is ultimately the ending point of this chapter. All of a sudden, Tio Juan can show what he knows about farming, and he can show that he isn't so much of a baby. And the very last line of this chapter is he had changed from a baby back to a man. All he needed was an opportunity to thrive in the environment that he loved and he was knowledgeable in. Yep. So awesome. A lot of bummers in this chapter, but these chapters, but we do end on a very positive note.
Absolutely. It's good stuff. Great stuff.
Yep. Be sure to hit like, subscribe, and the bell. And next episode, we are doing chapters 5 and 6. That is the characters Leona and Sam. We will see you then.
See you then.